Hello and welcome to our lecture in the Future Punk series. Today we will look onto something that is maybe even more esoteric than the topics that we have covered so far. I mean, we have come quite some way. We have looked into what the future is as a concept in strategic planning in startups. We have seen these long time series and the idea to deal with time in certain ways. In the last lecture, we have looked into dialectics as a method of making sense of that, kind of seeing the contradictions, atemporalities, things that exist at the same time and kind of seem out of place. And now we will leave all that behind. We will just open our minds for a totally different kind of mindset. Let go everything that keeps us down here on earth and lift our souls to the skies. What we are addressing in this lecture will be truly kind of end of the world perspectives on the future. And in particular, we will look into ideas that can be summarized under the rubric of the singularity. The word singularity is usually not associated with the future. I mean, a singularity means something that is just a point. In mathematics, that is, for example, if you have a function that is like, for example, 1 by x, that has a singularity at the origin. I mean, if you divide something by 0, that goes up to infinity. So this is called a singularity. Or in physics, I mean, in Einstein's general theory of relativity, a singularity can happen, as Karl Schwarzschild, one of Einstein's followers, in I think 1916, 1 year after Einstein published his theory, kind of suddenly saw. So actually there could be the curvature of the universe could at points really break down. If there is enough mass gathered at a certain point, the universe will basically kind of go down to infinity and have infinite curvature. So this is a singularity, the black hole. We are using the word singularity, however, here in a different kind of meaning that was first in a conversation, obviously, mentioned by the Austrian-Hungarian American mathematician and physicist John von Neumann. We only have the testimony here of Neumann's friend and collaborator Stanislav Ulam. So Ulam was also a mathematician and worked together with John von Neumann at the Manhattan Project. The Manhattan Project was the effort of the United States to create nuclear weapons before the Germans would achieve that, and out came indeed the atomic bombs that were then dropped over Japan. So John von Neumann is really an important thinker. He can be credited with the invention of game theory already in the 1930s. He published quite some interesting articles and books on the theory of games, kind of to mathematize how games work that contain a certain kind of uncertainty. For example, if you play a game of chess, you don't know what your partner's next move would be, but you might find ways to guess what would be the next plausible move. So this is the mind of John von Neumann. He is also credited with inventing our modern times computers architecture. So computers that we use are still called von Neumann machines. So in that respect, he is really a very down-to-earth person, but he's also known for really thinking ahead. And one of the things is here in the obituary that Stanislav Ulam would write after John von Neumann's untimely death in 1957. So he would write that things in human minds, in human culture, in humanity change, and in changing things, we might approach some essential singularity in the history because our technology might just kind of run away. So this is the first time someone brought together this idea that technology, human culture in a way, would evolve so far that history would end. And then, I mean, a bit later, so you see here this paper by Werner Winch. So Winch is also a mathematician and also a science fiction writer, teaching in the University of California in San Diego. He wrote this paper in the NASA, in the National Space Agency of the United States, to bring to people's awareness here in the 1980s that computers will bring this singularity, this moment when history ends, to us. So in a way there will be computers that will be more powerful than us, and as soon as that happens, the computers develop a life of their own, and then we have to deal with that somehow. And for reasons not totally straightforward, I would say, in that paper, it is in the readings, by the way, so you can have a look yourself, history ends and everything kind of stops evolving because we just fall down. And this idea of an all-ending moment in time is, of course, deeply religious. I mean, there is no scientific thinking behind that, even if it is written by mathematicians. It is what in philosophy or theology is called eschatological. So the eschaton, the Greek word eschatos, means the last, and eschaton are the last things, so meaning the things that happen before the end of the world or at the end of the world, which could be, for example, the Last Judgment. The Last Judgment is a concept that is very old. I mean, the earliest depictions, I think, are from ancient Egyptian time, can be found in pharaonic tombs. So much older than, for example, the mention of the Last Judgment in, for example, the Bible. So that has been in people's beliefs for a long time, that at some point in the future the universe will just end and then there will be a judgment. That is not the same in every religion. There is other religions that are more cyclical. When, for example, the world goes up and then decays, and then comes the next night in which God dreams the universe again. These cyclical forms, of course, have also a moment in which things kind of get restarted, so it's not totally different. It seems that it is a pretty kind of common ground on many religions, that you think of the last things. There is, of course, another word for that is quite common, that is the apocalypse. So apocalypsis in Greek means a revelation, something that is opened in front of you, and it is the last book of the Christian Bible, of the New Testament, the Revelations of St. John, which is a bit a strange book. It's really worth reading. It's a very intense read. And there's all these things like the second coming of Christ and the end of the world and the war in heaven. So it's very Manichaean. So you see that there is not only God, the almighty creator of the world, but there is something that fights against him, the Antichrist, Lucifer, the devil, and at some point there is this last battle, and then the world will end and the Last Judgment will come. So these ideas of having this Manichaeism are usually kind of a bit. It's not what most of the religions around here would allow, I would say. So you have usually the thing. I mean, if God is almighty, there can't be some other thing happening that's kind of challenging them. I mean, why would you allow that as an almighty God? So that was always a heresy. And it's really interesting how that made its way kind of in the common belief systems. So these signs of the apocalypse, I mean, of course, there is many descriptions. There is also in the Islamic world, I mean, a whole list of things that might happen. And if you Google for the signs of the apocalypse, there is no shortage of kind of these of people who say, well, actually, we've seen these signs. For example, that the desert turns into a forest. Just look around the Emirates and see how much of the desert has already been kind of changed into a blooming landscape with meadows, for example, a golf course and whatever with irrigation. So that is already a sign of the apocalypse. I mean, I'm not making that up. You can read that yourself. I don't want to comment on that. That is the disclaimer now for the rest of the lecture. Although I find many of these ideas very interesting, you should not think of them as true or false, but as a way of approaching the future in a rather poetic or even spiritual way. So we will come back to the spiritual meaning, in particular, of the idea of the spirit in talking about the more technological concept of the singularity. There is very famous movements of Manichaeism or Gnosticism. So gnosis is that means that people know. So Gnostics believe that they know somehow how the world works. That's kind of it's not as direct as in magic thinking. So in magic thinking, you just have a spell and then something happens. In Gnosticism, you know that there is certain rules by which the world works, and these rules are even, so to say, even an almighty God can't change these rules. So that's called Gnosticism, and again, that is seen as a heresy in many religions, because in a way, I mean, that challenges really how creation or how the world can work. So one of the strongest movements in Europe, or most famous, of Gnosticism happened in the 13th century, centered in France. It happened all over Europe, starting probably in Bulgaria, or what is today Bulgaria, and then making its way all around Europe. But the center of this Gnostic movement, called the Cathars, was in southern France. And here in the picture you see the very center of it, which is the French city of Carcassonne. So Carcassonne is a very strongly fortified fortress on a mountain, and is completely preserved for reasons that have to do with the Gnostic movement. It completely survived the Middle Ages because the Gnostic movements of the Cathars was fought down by the French crown. So the French king at that time, I mean, most parts of southern France, or what is today France, was not part of the French kingdom 800 years ago. So it was a power struggle as well. And very powerful princes in southern France would declare their independence not only by denying paying taxes to the French king, but also by kind of giving up the Catholic religion and changing it for what they call the catharsis. So catharsis means the purge. So katharoi means the pure ones. So the idea is that these people who followed would believe that the second coming of Jesus Christ would be immediate. It would just happen in the next years. So they would stop having any kind of worldly pleasures. In particular, they would not have any children. Because why would you have children if the world ends next year anyway? So that is one of the things that they did. Then they would give up all private property. They would live in kind of communal groups, almost like monks, and would have very strict rules what they would eat. For example, they would be very strict vegetarians. And all of this made them, of course, very suspicious, and in particular, their complete denial of any kind of authority, being it the authority of the king or the authority of the Pope. It is also the time when the Crusades were at its peak. So the Crusades is another kind of interesting and really horrible moment in time. There is many explanations why that happened. So the first crusade was maybe like 50 years before the time we talk now. His interest in reconquering Jerusalem or conquering Jerusalem for Christianity, and by that means also destroying Constantinople, which lay on the way. I mean, behind that is a huge rise in population density in Europe at that time. So within like 100 years, around 1200, due to continuous warm weather and very humid weather, there were no famines anymore. And so population in Europe tripled. And which is really extraordinary. I mean, there were suddenly so many more people. And with this super dense population came several difficulties. So, for example, there were too many people who were kind of no longer fitting in. So, in particular, there were too many knights. So, the knights, the people who would have a horse to fight, they would have nothing to do in Europe. I mean, there were not enough wars, so to say, to fight, and so kind of, and what to do is just send them overseas. So that was one thing. The second is, I mean, clearly the hope to catch up finally. So from the year 1000 at least, people in Europe would more and more realize that they had fallen far behind what was going on in the East. So for example, a Byzantine princess, Theophanu, would marry the German Roman Emperor Otto III around 1000 AD, so it's about 1,000 years ago, and would come to what is today Germany or France or Italy, basically, and bring all her things with her and all her maids and all, and people would suddenly realize that they are so much ahead, so that they would have art and culture and science and philosophy that would be so much better than anything in Europe. And the second is that the further the trade would lead, so in 1200 we are talking also about, for example, Marco Polo going all the way through the Silk Road, not only to China, but I mean crossing all over the Middle East and Central Asia and coming back. And he was not only Marco Polo, he's just the one that we all know about. So people realized that in the East people had much better technology, they had much more art going on and philosophy going on and so on. So there were different approaches what to do with that. I mean, one is of course that you invite people, as did the Emperor Frederick II, who lived in Apulia, I mean in southern Italy, what is today around Naples. And he allegedly spoke Arabic and would invite Arabic scholars for disputation, and a lot of Arabic knowledge for the first time made it into the European minds at that time. So that completely changed how people saw the world. I mean, all the golden age Arabic philosophy and sciences suddenly, at least a bit of that, became known in Europe. So that really blew people's minds, I think. And on the other hand, it showed people that there were other places that might be worth going. And I mean, as people were at that time, going means always conquering. And so this is the time of the Crusades. And one of these crusades was not sent towards Jerusalem, it was sent to southern France. And people were completely massacred. I mean, that was really the end of the world. I mean, for the Kataroi, they really thought, well, that is exactly how we imagined it. Kind of the devil's armies come now and kill everyone. So they offered little resistance. They let just themselves all kill, and hundreds or if not thousands of them were burned on the stake. So it was a bloody mess. And for example, the leader of the Crusaders, when asked by the Pope how he would know whom to burn, he would just say, well, he doesn't care, because God at the Last Judgment, he would know. So that is not a joke. I mean, it was discovered when the Vatican opened its secret archives about 30 or so years ago. I mean, scholars looked into the documents and really found it all. I mean, all the horrors of that. So that is a bit a sidetrack, but I mean, this shows you a bit kind of the dynamics of thinking that the world ends soon, and then building your Gnostic Manichaean world system on it. So we jump now ahead 1,000 years because there is not much going on in terms of Gnosticism and Manichaeism in most places in the world, because in most religions, as I mentioned, that's seen as heretic anyway, and people were struggling with other things over the next 1,000 years or so, like for example then with Enlightenment and the French Revolution and all these things. And in the 19th century, technology came and led to a deep change in understanding how people's culture might actually change the world. So our next chapter takes place in Russia about 100 years ago. So in the time of the First World War, so around 1910 to 1920, these 10 years, a new school of thought started in Russia, which then really bloomed in the newly started Soviet Union in 1917. And that's Cosmism. So the word cosmos is Greek and means order. It also means the universe. Universe is a Latin word and means everything. So universal means, I mean, enshrouding everything. So that is what it means. In Germany it's Weltall. So that means the world, everything. And in Russian, that's the same. So Vselennaya means the universe, and if you have the first syllable, so Vsyo means all, and that is the Greek pan, all encompassing. So that's the universe, and here you see this book, Volia Vselennoi, the will of the universe. So, and that is the cosmicists' belief, that the universe can be spirited and develop its own will. And we will look how that will work. So what happened is that, so in the 1860s, so that means like 160 years ago, the novels of Jules Verne, the French science fiction author, were translated into Russian. So Jules Verne's novels became a major bestseller in Russia. So everyone was reading them, and in particular, The Journey to the Moon. That was one of the most loved novels in the late 19th century. And one of the people totally inspired by Jules Verne's novels was Konstantin Tsiolkovsky. So we know Konstantin Tsiolkovsky, I mean, at least if you study physics, mainly from his contribution to rocket science. So Tsiolkovsky became a mathematician and engineer and is credited for coming up with the first working formula that would prove that you could send a rocket out of Earth's gravitation by using liquid fuel. So he is really a pioneer of Soviet rocket science, but also he wrote science fiction. And his science fiction, one of the science fiction or even theological treatises like the universal will here, inspired the cosmicist school. So this is a drawing by Tsiolkovsky from his paper Album of Space Travel. So the interesting thing, so first to note, is that what we call the space race, kind of the Soviet Union on the one hand and the United States on the other hand, trying to get into space and then also to the moon first, that is actually not how it happened. So the Soviets had a vision about going to space totally independently from any kind of competition. So while the West only started that after the Nazis had built their horrible rocket weapon systems. Nazi engineer Werner von Braun was really a very evil figure, defected to the United States at the late last days of the Second World War, and then built these rockets that finally became the United States space program. In the Soviet Union, it starts much earlier, and so, for example, the first state-run program in the Soviet Union is already in 1933, so in the early times of Stalinism, and it was kind of this collaboration of Red Army military engineers with these cosmic-minded people, these poets, these science fiction authors who also were physicists at the same time. So the early times of the Soviet Union, you have always to imagine that that a lot is going on that kind of bridges the two worlds. So there is the avant-garde in the arts, which cosmic art is one part of, totally ahead of its time. And on the other hand, you have advanced sciences and engineering, and there is no gap between that because they are kind of overlapping. And the cosmicists are one example of that movement. So here you see kind of a nice drawing. This is people floating in space. I mean, there's no gravity, so they're floating around in the spacecraft, the central point of the cosmicists is this idea. Not only that space travel is possible, but it will lead to colonize the whole universe. So Tsiolkovsky thought that there is like 500,000 at least inhabitable planets in the galaxy, which is, by the way, probably a very accurate estimate, as we know now from astronomical research. So there seems to be hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of inhabitable planets. And Tsiolkovsky thought, well, I mean, we just go there and colonize them, and we will spread human race all over the universe. And by that, the universe gets spirited. There was also pop culture going on. For example, here you see the, I think, 1928 movie Aelita, Queen of Mars. So Aelita is in trouble as the Queen of Mars, and then comes the Russian engineer traveling to Mars and help her fighting down the bourgeoisie on Mars and building kind of a Soviet Union in the Mars. This is an early science fiction movie that was very successful and much loved in the Soviet Union. Very avant-garde, as you see from this movie poster. Probably the most radical of the cosmicists is Alexei Kapitanovich Gastyev. So Gastyev is a writer and a poet. He's credited with starting a movement called Proletkunst, so the proletarian art, very strong language. I mean, he was very radical, and by that, of course, that was his death sentence. Stalin let him be murdered in 1939, sorry, 1939. And he would fantasize that there would be an utopian world in space where people would be replaced by proletarian units identified just by ciphers such as ABC 321,075,0 and so on. A mechanized collectivism that would take place of the individual personality in the psychology of the proletariat. There would be no longer need for emotions, and the humans would not need a soul, but would be measured by a pressure gauge or a speedometer instead of seeing them smile or frown. So his vision of how the world will evolve is that people will become like machines, transhumanly transformed into kind of half machines, half robots, cyborgs actually. These words didn't exist at the time yet. The word robot didn't exist yet either. And these machine people, these cyborg organisms, would live in this totally anarchical way. Anarchical means, anarchist means that there is no power, because they wouldn't need power. They don't have a free will because they don't need it anymore. They have their agency because they're a collective. And that is the vision of the future, is this hive mind that emerges, that doesn't need any structure anymore. And that was seen as the problematic view by Stalin, because Stalin says, no, this is not how it works, because we have the party, and the party is a hierarchy with the chairman of the party as the top, and everything that challenges that is seen as sedition. And this is why he was murdered. So behind that, of course, is more than just this vision of an anarchy of cyborgs. It is humans constructing themselves into God. And that is what the Russians, the cosmicists called Bograditselvo, constructing godnesses. And here you see, I mean, although you have quite sound engineers and people, I mean, seem to be very much grounded on the world, that it is totally drifting into theology here. Well, that was the Russians, the cosmicists, not much studied today, although I think it is really worthwhile looking into their super avant-garde and edgy writings and art. Now we jump forward another 100 years into, I mean, basically my lifetime and even, I mean, our time now. So the next person we want to look at is Raymond Kurzweil, or Kurzweil. So Kurzweil wrote a book that I can show you here. It is called The Singularity is Near. It is a very thick book, as you can see. There's a lot in it, and we shall look into that. So this is, if you Google Kurzweil, he comes up as the inventor of the singularity, the technological singularity of our time, and also is credited, of course, with institutionalizing the Singularity University. So we'll look into that a bit. But in the beginning of his career, he was a technician, an engineer, and did really interesting things. So he started in the 1970s building machines that would help the blind. So he would build machines that would automatically display Braille code so that you could, with your fingers, read, but the Braille code would change. So by that, you could actually display things on a screen for the blind. And these machines were quite successful, and people were really acknowledging that as a great achievement. And he also experimented with human voice generation, so that that, for example, an artificial voice could read text, and you wouldn't need a person to read things to the blind. And that is, of course, another really interesting kind of work of inclusion. And by that, he became acquainted to the blind musician Stevie Wonder. So Stevie Wonder was very intrigued by the quality of Kurzweil's machines, and asked Kurzweil if he had never considered to use that also to produce musical instrument that would work with these advanced technologies. And then they started kind of collaborating. Wonder was kind of a consultant, and Kurzweil, the engineer, would start a company, or would pivot his company from the Braille machines to a machine building these new musical instruments called synthesizers. The synthesizers had just been invented by Moog, another engineer, and Kurzweil worked together with Moog and then came up with a synthesizer that would be quite revolutionary again, because it would for the first time use samples, that means recorded sounds of actual acoustic instruments, like for example of drums or bells or strings or brass or whatever, and would rebuild these sampled waveforms with the oscillators that the electrical oscillators, to create artificial waveforms from it. And that gave the Kurzweil synthesizers a totally different sound as the totally artificially sounding, or really totally electronic sounding Moog synthesizers. So in the 1980s, the Kurzweil synthesizer became really successful, and people really loved them. And by the way, they were also the only synthesizers who would have their knobs and buttons labeled in Braille. So blind people could use the Moog synthesizer and much more easily. Yeah, so I would say about 25 or so years ago, Kurzweil started kind of to change his life, and probably he was in midlife crisis or whatever brings people to do things like that, and he started focusing on that it would be a good idea not to die. So he's one of these extroprians, as these people are called, people who think that we have to fight entropy in the universe. The universe gets more and more entropic. That means, like things that break don't reassemble themselves. If you drop a glass, it is broken. It will not form a new glass out of itself. You have to add energy to rebuild it, if it is possible in the first place. And the whole universe gets more and more entropic. That's called the heat death of the universe. It's not a pretty thought. And the extroprians say we have to fight that. We have to come against that. We have to come up with ideas to stop this horrible decay of the universe into heat death. And one of the ways is we can't let ourselves die. Many people have thought that immortality would be a great thing. I'm not so sure about that. I was never so much compelled by this idea. It seems like I don't know. At one point you might have seen it all, and death is maybe kind of okay. Well, for the extroprians it is not. So extroprians, you can see they have these necklaces like soldiers that say, in case of death, please call this number. And the number is that of a company called Alcor Life Extensions. So the Alcor Life Extensions is a company or a foundation that provides cryonic storage for dead bodies. So you would not put in the grave or be incinerated or whatever, but you would be stored in liquid nitrogen as at negative 180 degrees centigrade or so. So and people would hope that at that temperature your body would kind of be preserved to when the singularity then finally happens, that you could be reanimated and then live on. But Kurzweil thinks that might not even be necessary because he stays healthy and by that then just transforms himself into technology when the time is due. And we will look now how that works. And the interesting thing also, I mean, just mentioning Kurzweil's career here now is that since 2012, he is kind of the chief technologist at Google. So, yeah, I think I let it sit here. Let's look into the book, The Singularity is Near. So there's a lot of information here. We start kind of with the ideological framing, and I find it the second quote here by John Smart particularly nice. So the future can't be predicted is a common refrain, but when this perspective is wrong, it is profoundly wrong. And what people like Smart do is they know that the future is certain. So I mean, he says he's a futurist. I think he could use some advice for better web design, I think. But you clearly see this idea of accelerationism here. So Smart is one of the proponents of what's called accelerationism, and you have looked into accelerationist argumentation in your readings 2 weeks ago. So you know about this idea that everything gets faster and faster until things get infinitely fast, and that is a singularity thinking. And what Kurzweil takes here is, well, let's look at that in a kind of economical and scientific way and see all these exponential growth functions. So we talked about that in the lecture on predicting kind of strategic foresight, that there is a lot going on in the world that has exponential growth. For example, Moore's law, that basically the computation power of computers doubles every 18 months. And there's many other of these exponential laws, and this is just I just randomly copied them out of the book, but there is many more of things that seem to have exponential growth. So this is a logarithmic print of that, and everything grows exponential, and in particular the supercomputing power grows exponentially. And what Kurzweil says, well, that has been going on for a while now, and at one point computers will just reach the point when they will be smarter as a human being. And he predicts in 2005, when he wrote the book, that that would be in 2013, so 7 years back. I guess that was not what happened. Well, nevertheless, I mean, you could imagine actually that computers become really powerful, and in many aspects, of course, they are. I mean, clearly computers can calculate much better than any human can. Computers are much better in database lookups and also in all tasks, like, for example, curve fitting or whatever you need to do data science. I mean, that is exactly what computers are great. Computers are not that great, of course, in natural language processing, and although the progress has been significant, I mean, it's still a long way to go until computers are really good at that. But I believe that computers will emulate people's language sufficiently well to pass the so-called Turing test. The Turing test is not really an idea by Alan Turing. It's more like a side note on one of his papers where he didn't call it like the sweepstake or anything. He just said the way of seeing if a computer is capable of thinking, the only way that we can actually access that will be if we can't differentiate what is a computer and what is a human in a conversation. So if the computer seems human, that's probably as far as we can get in understanding if it is human. So Turing wouldn't say that computers will become conscious or anything like that. That is then an interpretation of his words. He says just we will never know. We will just have the surface. So we will not understand what is going on in the computer's mind if the computer reaches this level. And I think that is true. I think you see that already with artificial intelligence, that the things coming out of it are totally alien. I mean, if you try to understand, for example, image recognition algorithms, I mean, that leaves you totally startled, I think. I mean, it is really worthwhile doing, and I hope that over the course of your studies, you take machine learning and AI classes to see the beauty of that, to see these alien forms of comprehension. And if the computer actually is conscious or not, we will never know. That is really an interesting philosophical discussion on its own. There is two schools of this so-called hard problem of consciousness. The one is led by Douglas Hofstadter and other researchers like the Churchlands. They say, well, it is an illusion to think that we are conscious. So we are just as conscious as an advanced computer. This is the one side. So consciousness is just an illusion. It's an emergent property of our brains. And the other group says, which is led by John Searle, who is a Kantian philosopher, and David Chalmers, is also, I think, could be called a neo-Kantian philosopher. And they say, no, it is not an emergent property. Consciousness has much, much more going on than just kind of what is going on in form of software in our heads. There's a lot more to it, and we will not be able to understand it. And Chalmers goes further than that. So, I mean, basically what Turing said, and Chalmers makes it much more rigorous. So in his rigorous way, he says, I mean, even if the computer would be conscious, we will never know, because we can't communicate with the computer in a way that would ever convince us that it is conscious. So this is the debate that is going on, a super interesting debate and really worth looking into if you will come up with your own futurist thinkings. But back to Kurzweil. I mean, Kurzweil is not really bothered by this discussion. I mean, he's really very much an engineer. For him, it's totally clear that it is software running in our brains, and the brains are basically machines that can be replaced by semiconductor circuitry. So we have the first ingredient of the singularity, as Kurzweil would describe it, is exponential growth of computation power and many other things. The second is that we have computers that are very capable. So the computers is the second, and then comes brain science, which is also a large part of that book. I would say, talking to people who actually work in brain science and neuroscience, I mean, you can make your own mind in reading the book. You find it online in the readings. And then the last ingredient, the fourth ingredient, is nanotechnology. So, and then I mean, other visions that Kurzweil describes in the book. I mean, so he says, for example, we don't need to eat. We should think of eating like of sexuality. So we can kind of think of sexuality in kind of being separate from just having children. So, and we can think of eating totally different from just kind of keeping our body nourished. And he's living that life. So he basically lives on a kind of a diet of nutrient pills. I mean, it's really boxes of pills that he eats every day because he thinks that that will keep him fit. Yeah, so that's this extropian mindset here. And he thinks that our blood will become programmable. This is nanotechnology. We will have these nanites, these small nanoscopic, you could think of them a bit like mechanical virus or bacteria floating in our blood and changing our immune system, for example, will be the programmable blood. Then we will have bespoke organs that we will exchange. So, for example, if we go to space, we just exchange several of our organs to organs that are better for being in space. And if we come back, then we change them back into something else. And we will have bespoke brains. So we will be able to manufacture our brains in ways that would liberate our minds. And with this, we will reach around this year, maybe like in 2025, maybe 2030. So in the next 5 to 10 years, Kurzweil says we will reach the full capability of one human brain in computers. I mean, 2013, there's the first computer who can do a human. In the 2020s, we will reach kind of this as a standard product, and will probably be able to kind of upload ourselves there. And then, like in the 2030s or 2040s, all humanity will be in computers. So the computers will be much more powerful than any time in history all of humanity has been. And that is the singularity. This is when everything kind of goes to the end. There's very poetic drawings here. You see these epochs. I mean, you might remember the Kondratiev cycles. That's very similar here. So you have kind of the early time of the universe, which is just physics and chemistry. Yeah, that might be the case. I think he might be mistaken here, because then then DNA evolves, which is the biological information age. That might actually have happened very early in the universe. I mean, the universe has, at some point after the Big Bang, had cooled down to maybe like a few 10 degrees, and then life could have emerged just floating around. There was a lot of carbon and hydrogen around, so you could imagine kind of this primordial life billions of years back. So, but that doesn't matter. So it's the second epoch is biology with the DNA, and then the living organisms become more and more conscious, which is also it's a bit weird, because I've been thinking of consciousness or being sentient necessarily tied to the brain. I don't think that it is necessary. I mean, there is a whole study field which is very closely related to the Russian cosmicist. This is so-called panpsychism. So panpsychism thinks that everything can, to some extent, be regarded as consciousness. In particular, every life can be, because there is how life reacts to the world, and everything that interacts in a non-causal, non-physical way with its environment has at least some rudimentary form of consciousness. Well, that aside, I mean, here we have the third epoch, which is the brains, and then comes technology. I mean, people start using tools. Fire, for example, like 3 million years back, maybe they make cave paintings and whatnot. And then comes kind of this huge leap. Then comes this merger, where things kind of go together, and then the universe wakes up. So then we go to the stars, and the whole universe is populated with our minds, and we become kind of a living, kind of breathing brain. So this is this kind of way to salvation in Kurzweil's thinking. There's a few really interesting things that he brings together. I mean, I think the book is in its way worth reading. I mean, at least in parts. I mean, because it is really very strong utopian ideas, and brought together in a very, I mean, he is really a prophet. You know, he is not a scientist. He has the prophecy of how the world will end, really like in ancient times. You can really imagine him standing on a rock with a long white beard and kind of shouting at people that the last judgment is imminent. And he brings a lot of things in that are interesting from an interactive media point of view. So, for example, how does emergence work? And so he argues alongside Stephen Wolfram with these cellular automata. And if you listen to my lectures on decoding nature, you will see that there is a lot of beauty in using cellular automata to, with very simple mathematical rules, creating arbitrarily complex structures. And the argumentation is that you take that and create these universal computers out of very tiny kind of bits that automatically form in this autopoietic way. Kind of they have this emerging structure. So this is just one of the demos that from the Decoding Nature class, and here you see the famous rule 110 with this cellular automaton. You start with one black pixel, and with this rule, I mean this very simple set of rules that just looks at the color of one pixel and its two neighbors to determine the color that the pixel has in the next state. You see that there is a lot going on that looks totally arbitrary and chaotic. And if you look at an input, so if you think of the first line as an input program, you see that, I mean, indeed, arbitrary structures can come out. And that is proven. It can indeed be arbitrary structures because this rule is Turing complete. So the idea of these connected human brains, which is the third ingredient, as you might remember, of course, inspired many science fiction authors. I mean, through the decades already, in coming up with interesting futures. I just want to point you to Ramez Naam. Ramez Naam is born in Egypt in a Coptic family, and I think lives now in the United States or Canada, I forgot. But he is a successful science fiction author, and his books are very worth reading. In this idea of the nexus, which means the network, so the nexus, there is the minds are programmable and connect the humans together, and in a way, I mean, of course, it would be a very boring story if there would not be a twist to it, that like corrupt corporations and bad governments and so. And the story is set in 2040, so that is by no accident the year when Kurzweil predicts the singularity will happen, because they know each other. Ramez Naam is a teacher at the Singularity University, which is the school, it's a college that Kurzweil, together with collaborators like Peter Diamandis, founded to propagate his ideas. And actually there's a lot interesting stuff going on. It's all on YouTube. I mean, just look at it. It's super interesting what they teach. And you find very easy to follow introductory courses on all kinds of technology. So this is a nice quote by the futurist Michael Anisimov. So thinking of what the singularity, I mean, how this point in time when the singularity is reached will look like, and this is when the first transhuman intelligence is created and launches itself into recursive self-improvement. That is the singularity. So that because it creates things that we can't predict anymore. It is the end of time as we know it. So what we have here is so transhuman, that means beyond what we are. It's kind of on the other side. Intelligence. So intelligence that is not human anymore, but it is not anti-human. It's not machine intelligence either. It's something else. It is something between human and machine intelligence. And then it starts reproducing and self-improving. So a totally different form of evolution starts. And the whole movement of that far precedes Kurzweil's ideas, comes out of thinking like that, which is the transhumanist movement. So transhumanism as a word can be credited to the Iranian philosopher and author Feridun Esfandiari. I hope I pronounced that not totally ridiculous. Esfandiari is a left Iran to teach in New York. So he he was a teacher at the New York, the New School in New York, which is avant-garde school, and he was born, or he is born in 1930. So he changed his name, anticipating this transhuman time, into FM 2030. So he already did what the cosmicists, the Russian cosmicists, would demand, that we stop having names. We would just have these alphanumerical identifiers. And so he would have this visionary utopian view on robotics, that people become completely collectivist in bodies that would be half machines, cyborgs. And that was also happening in the Soviet Union. I mean, no lesser than Leo Trotsky, who was the second in charge in the Soviet Union after Lenin. I mean, he says the human is by no means finished. It is still highly awkward. So the human as an animal has not evolved by plan, but spontaneously, and has accumulated many contradictions. I mean, it's not perfect, in other words. It's just evolution. And the Communist Party in the Soviet Union hated evolution, because evolution is not planned. There is no scientific control behind evolution. It's just random. And that can't be good for communism. So to produce a new, improved version of the human, that is the future task of communism. So we have it in the beginning of the Soviet Union already. Trotsky says it is the program of Soviet communism to make humans truly good. And that means to transhumanize, to overcome these contradictions, these shortcomings. At last, my dear Homo sapiens, I will work on you. Yeah, and I mean, there's then followers of this transhumanist idea. For example, this is Steve Mann. So Steve Mann, I don't know if he's running around like that still, but he first kind of tried out all these cybernetic gear. He was one of the first people to self-log, so he had kind of this camera on that he would continuously film everything he would see, and would have his brain waves always measured and so on, and always track these things, so always be packed with gear to collect the data for becoming totally transhuman. And I mean, if you think that it's only these weird scholars and old communists and Russian avant-garde artists, and maybe a synthesizer producing engineer, it is even Elon Musk, the richest person in the world, who takes that very seriously. In his own startup, Neuralink, where he tries to at least get the brain directly controlling machines. And what Musk, in a very cynical way, puts out is, let's try to catch up with the machines before the humans will become apes in a zoo. So he thinks that machines will be so powerful that the humans will just be put into a reservation or into a zoo by the machines, if not totally killed. But probably the machines wouldn't kill the humans. Why would they? I mean, in the end, the humans built them. So actually, now we should have a bit of criticism on that. There is no indication that computers can work that way. I mean, I have all sympathy for artificial intelligence, and I think that's a great thing to pursue. But we don't know how the brain works. And over my lifetime, as far as I have heard from people working in that field, it hasn't really improved. And all the functional MRI and all this imaging technology that we have didn't bring us a step closer to understand what's going on actually. And that might have very physical causes. So what all the singularitarians and all these extroprians, what they totally forget is that our brain is just one organ in our body. So we have no idea how the rest of our body interacts with our brain to make us think. And in particular also the different layers of our brain, I mean starting with the so-called vegetative brain, which is the prolonged spine. I mean clearly all our emotions, as with the sense, sit in a totally different part of the brain than what we think of as being our consciousness. I mean, at least as people understand that. Our language processing capabilities are totally different than our visual brain and so on. So this is very specific hardware. It is not just software. So the hardware of our brain may have a lot to do how we work, and it might, as I said, not be our brain alone. It might be our whole body that kind of feeds in and gets back. And so far, I haven't read much useful ideas about that. So this is really something that I would like you to do, to come up with kind of these singularitarian ideas that are not as simplistic, that are not so reductionist. Well, I mean, there is a very beautiful, I think, a path in which our technology indeed enhances our bodies. So here you see that's a screenshot of a television documentary about a friend of mine, Enno Park. So Enno Park is a computer scientist and engineer who was infected with the measles. I mean, he's my age, so when he was a child there was no vaccination against the measles yet. So he got measles as a young age and lost his hearing. So he's deaf. And I mean, when I first encountered him on Twitter, he was still deaf and would use Twitter, for example, as one way of communicating with people in normal language. And then came the miracle, the cochlear implant, which is a cybernetic device. It is a microphone that gets implanted into your hearing nerve, and people who have developed a sense of hearing in their early childhood but then lost their hearing capabilities can use these cochlear implants to substitute their ears. And by that, Enno can hear just totally like a normal person, I think. I don't know that subjectively, of course, only he can tell, but you can totally have nice conversations with him and he hears the surrounding sounds and so on. And here comes the interesting thing. So Enno always thought that actually he would like to try out different setups in the firmware of his cybernetic device, of his implant. But that is not possible because intellectual property rights prevent him from doing that. So in doing that, he would break the warranty rule and would lose the capability of these devices being serviced. And out of this idea, he started the movement Cyborgs, which is an association in Germany, which is an association for cyborg rights. And also, of course, cyborg culture. I was one of the founding members of that organization in 2014. And one, of course, of the program points is to make it for cyborgs to have the right, the ownership of what is part of their body. So there is a lot of interesting things going on. There is a lot of cyborg movement in the United States also. I can only encourage you to read the Cyborg Manifesto by Donna Haraway, a great scholar. We discussed that a bit more in the lecture Communication and Technology. In science fiction, there is one, I would say, series of books. It's a trilogy by Richard K. Morgan that I found particularly intense and interesting to read about this kind of post-transhuman world. So it is the Altered Carbon trilogy by Richard Morgan. I think it was turned into a television series by Netflix that is actually very well done. It's a bit more kind of mainstreamy than the books. It is, however, very violent. So I have to ask for viewer discretion if you want to watch it. Same, reading the book, it is very violent, totally disturbing. Because what it describes is that people, they inherit some kind of technology that they find on Mars from an ancient civilization that has gone 50,000 years or so ago. But this technology inspires people to make a huge leap forward technological-wise. And so they come up with devices by which you can actually download your, so to say, your mind and soul, if you think these two exist. I mean, all that you are basically into what's called your stack. And a stack is a kind of a small thing that is sits in your spine, and you can change bodies in just changing the stack. And the main character, Takeshi Kovacs, is an elite soldier who becomes a mercenary. And by that I mean he jumps from one planet to the other by just re-sleeving, getting a new body where he lands, and it's all kinds of adventures. And it's the situation in that world, I mean, it is a very dark idea of how singularity would look like. For example, one thing that becomes clear is with this ability to kind of just live on by changing your body, the physical life, the bodily life gets totally devaluated, and no one values the life of a person anymore. And other things, I mean, like he just mentions accidentally, for example, torture comes back. I mean, so no one has the police or anyone, no one really uses useful interrogation technique anymore, because you can just torture someone to death and then restart them and do it again until they confess. And this is just examples of this very dark side of the singularity. It's also worth reading because the depiction in the second and third novel of the foreign planets, the other planets to where the character then goes, is totally beautiful, and it's very imaginative. So it's a great science fiction read. I can only recommend that. And so let's loop back to Ray Kurzweil. If you haven't seen it yet, now comes the proof that we are talking about truly spiritual things, a truly theological version of the world. So if you see this passage here from the book, what will happen is that our civilization will expand outward, turning all the dumb matter and energy we encounter into sublimely intelligent, transcendent matter and energy. So in a sense we can say the singularity will ultimately infuse the universe with the Spirit. And although we don't know if he means the Holy Spirit, at least we can assume that he means the Spirit in the sense of Hegel. So for Hegel, the Spirit, der Geist, is this kind of super subjective consciousness. So I mean, it is kind of clear that that people, I mean, have their mind of their own, but something is going on between people that we might call culture, religion. I mean, all the things that people form as a group. And the thing that inspires, which actually means bringing the spirit into people, by Hegel is called der Geist, the spirit. And what Kurzweil here says is, this is what we will do with the whole universe. We will set sails outward and will turn all the dumb matter into spirited matter. We will animate the whole universe. And this is, I mean, without question, religious belief. Religious is indeed the root of this thinking. Finally, I mean, we turn it back into the roots of media theory with the French Jesuit priest Pierre Teilhard de Chardin. So Pierre Teilhard de Chardin is a great thinker, an anthropologist and paleontologist in the first half of the 20th century. So you see him here in full colonial outfit in the expedition, the French Transasia exhibition that would show the superiority of French engineering with all these all-terrain vehicles, and Teilhard de Chardin, as one of the leading anthropologists in France at that time, would be kind of the researcher of that group. The interesting thing is that he can be credited with bringing the ideas of Darwin to a level that the Catholic Church could make sense of it. So he is very influential in reconciling Christian belief with modern science. And the second thing that he saw is wherever he looked in history, but also in our current time, he saw that, I mean, since the most ancient times of humanity, I mean, really like the pre-human use of tools, you can see that the tools that we use are part of our nature. And that was his discovery. So that there is no difference between culture and nature, but culture is just what is our nature. So that's the human nature. And this idea that the tools are not just something external that people used or use, but that the tools are the extension of our bodies. For example, that my glasses are extensions of my eyes. They make my eyes better. They become part of my body as being a cyborg, really. And that was, of course, the inspiration for Herbert Marshall McLuhan. So McLuhan took Teilhard's readings and was totally inspired by that. I mean, he even became a Catholic and converted because he found this idea, this messianic idea of the human evolution being kind of this inspired becoming technological cyborgs as part of creation. And that is, of course, the core of his media theory. So, and the kind of the things that Teilhard de Chardin would see in if you extrapolate, I mean, he would see the early rise of electronic media with radio and with cinema, of course. I mean, so he started to understand that there is something going on that is more than just using a hammer and a nail. And that is communication technology, like the telephone also. And with that, people move beyond just being on their own with their tools. They connect to each other, no matter of space and time. We can read books that have been written millennia ago. We can read these old texts as if they would still talk to us. We can understand what people were saying hundreds of years ago, even in languages that we know. So by that we can communicate with our ancestors, and we communicate with ourselves, I mean, across the globe, sending emails now, of course, that has become another electronic media that has become instantaneous. And by that, he says, we will end up in the noosphere. Nou, noon, means the will in Greek. And here we are back to Tsiolkovsky with Volia, the will of the universe. That is Teilhard de Chardin, thinking that all people in the world will be connected to one big mind that will end all war and suffering, because everyone will feel with everyone else. And from that we will set sails across the galaxy and colonize everything and inspire and animate the universe, just as Kurzweil tells us 100 years later now. And when we come there, we will no longer need the Earth necessarily, because we will have all the other planets. The evolution, as we think of it, has stopped. And Teilhard de Chardin calls that the point omega. Omega is the last letter in the Greek alphabet, and in the book of Revelation in the Bible, Christ says, I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. And this revelation of the second coming is what Teilhard de Chardin ties to the technological singularity. And I think his quote describing human endeavor is very telling for the singularitarian mindset here. A human, to be human, must have tried everything to the end.